Hi, students. This week we're going to talk a little bit about preparing, setting a tone, preparing to teach, what type of information goes in behind the scenes to give you some tips to be able to be prepared so that when you do your lessons, they're a little bit more effective. Sometimes students tend to think that, teaching, especially at a college university level, that the majority of the work is done during the actual class time, and that's not necessarily the case. Many times, um, a lot of the work is done. There's more work done during prep time than in class time. So where do we begin? Right? There's really no set process. It really depends on your style, your comfort level. Some students prefer to start writing goals. Others prefer being structured. Others prefer being, different ways to be able to start. So there's really no one set way to start. That will evolve as you become more comfortable with your teaching practices. One of the things we want to be able to do is compare teaching and the way learners understand, right? And really compare adult learning to children learning, right? I think there are some similarities and there's also some differences, and I think it's important to compare those two and be able to discuss where, as teachers, we need to be able to identify some things that we need to be aware of, and then also understand some things that may be different, especially as you venture in teaching to adults. So, some of the similarities in terms of adults and children learning, and for you as teachers, is that you have to construct understanding, right? The idea, the role of a teacher is to really set up learning where it becomes a very natural and flowing type of understanding process for students, right? You also want to be able to engage students. You want to make sure that information is relevant, whether it's a young student, first learning about STEM or science, or whether it's an adult learner learning about developmental theory, right? You need to make them engaged and make it relevant. The last similarity I want to talk about is really understanding that both children and adults may have different learning styles, different ways of processing information, and so you always should take that into consideration. You have some visual learners, auditory learners, different type of learners, and so you need to always understand that when you're teaching. Some of the key differences that I've seen over the course of my time teaching have been that for adults tend to be more self-directed and participate more. Children have a hard time really being self-directed. You see a little bit at the secondary level, kind of junior, senior year in high school, but for the most part, prior to that time, it is a little bit more difficult. Again, the other piece is past experiences. As you grow older and you have experiences to be able to gain and garner and be able to connect, it becomes an easier process, right? When you're younger, you just don't have a lot of those experiences. Reluctance to change, to be honest with you, I see this more in adults. I think kids are sometimes more willing to change. I think adults tend to be set in their ways and be able to sometimes become difficult to be able to teach them new ways of learning. So, in terms of structure, this will depend again on your style. Some people prefer a very structured approach to teaching, others kind of have more of a free flowing process. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in later in this lecture, where we talk about how people maybe deem their first day of class. In terms of the big picture, right? Goals is critical, right? And the idea of goals specific to learning and teaching students is, where do we want our students to be at the end of the lecture? What do we want them to learn? So one place to start is to really establish effective goals, right? That way you can measure your own effectiveness in terms of teaching, and also be able to ensure that you are teaching what you need to teach, right? I like to compare this for those of you who are in the elementary world, or just teaching in general. In public schools, we have STOL objectives, which are basically concrete goals that we work with our teachers to say, hey, we want you to work on this particular goal this year to make sure that you're effective in teaching in this particular fashion, right? So in a similar way, on a smaller scale, you want to set yourself goals to make sure that, again, you're being an effective teacher and that you're relaying the message that you want to come across to the students in a way that's effective and that teachers and students are learning and are able to apply. So that's one of the biggest goals. We're really going to break down into more specifics in terms of what it means to be able to have effective goals, what it means to be able to have objectives that fit into your goal. We know this as SMART goals, right? So although your text leaves out the R, which is relative, um, SMART goals, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is goals that are strategic, measurable, attainable, and time bound, right? And why are those important? Well, you want to make sure you have goals so that you can measure them, right? It doesn't make sense to do a goal that's not measurable, that's not connected to the course, that's not attainable, not realistic, or that is past the time that you'll be working with your students, because that doesn't make sense, right? And you also don't want to shortchange yourself and say, your students will master the material within 8 weeks if you're in a 16-week course, right? It's not a reasonable thing to think that students will master the material no matter how great of an instructor you may be, if the course is meant to be a 16-week process for them to do it in half the time, right? So you want to make sure you have small objectives, being able to strategically be able to place them in ways, in manners that will make sense to you, that will be attainable, that can be measured, right? So very concrete, measurable goals, and then time bound, right? Those are all important elements of SMART goals, right? To make sure that, again, some of you that are working in schools already are probably familiar with SMART goals. I know we live and die by these in our work. I do a lot of grant writing at our school district, and in the grant writing, every one of the grants we've written probably for the last 15 years ask for SMART goals, right? People want to make sure that you have an effective way of measuring progress, right? Are you achieving what you say you're going to achieve, right? So you'll see a lot of this. I've been seeing a lot more of these objectives in syllabi. So as you review your syllabus as one of the assignments later in the semester, some of you may see objectives built into it, right? Measurable goals. And sometimes a lot of the accreditation agencies will be asking for these type of goals and objectives to be embedded into the syllabus so that we can see that teachers are projecting the type of learning that we want and then measuring the effectiveness with students, right? So that's an important key aspect of teaching, to make sure that you can measure, how you're doing as an instructor, how effective you are, and then kind of go from there, right? So if you look at, your text talks about the Bloom's taxonomy, right? So understanding that it's a tiered approach, right? So this is the way people learn, right? And you have to get them to remember. Then once they've built that foundation of remembering, they have to understand it. Once something is understood, then you want them to be able to apply it, and it goes on from there, right? What other resources can we use when we're preparing, right? You can use textbooks, you can use readings, you can use YouTube, you can use TED Talks. A lot of the things that you see that are being interpreted now in more modern, especially online courses, you'll see a lot of embedded videos, right? Just to keep things moving, dynamic. It's really kind of an innovative way to be able to use a variety of media in getting more material in your course so that it becomes more concrete for students, right? So where in the past you would see textbooks and readings and discussions in class, now you're getting videos. In fact, I use videos both in person and online, right? So that's definitely one way to get that point across. In terms of the syllabus for your course, and again, you'll be doing this as an assignment down the line, But the syllabus really should be the heart of your course, right? It's what provides the structure, the clarity of your course. What should be included? And you'll see a lot of these elements in syllabus and syllabi that you review and you look at, right? You should have goals, objectives, what textbook you're using, what the schedule will look like, what your grading procedure is, any policies on late submission, policies on missing class, maybe plagiarism type of policies, other things that sometimes departments or schools will mandate, you'll see embedded into your syllabus. And so it is important that you look at syllabus and you look at the syllabi in a way that is contextually processed in a way that makes sense to those that are reviewing the information, your students, so that they have kind of an outline, right? I look at my syllabus as really an outline, right? And things can change, but you want to give students a general type of structure to the syllabus that really outlines the information. So your syllabus is really the first opportunity students get to set the tone, right? You get to set the tone as an instructor, as a teacher, and what kind of instructor will you be? This is a funny cartoon that I ran across. It says the first day of school. And so if you see here, homework on your first day was to read 4 chapters, have a quiz, and then you have your books, right? So I thought this was funny. And there are some professors that are like this. Some of you may have had professors that are like this yourselves, right? I tend to be kind of a little bit more laid back, especially your first day, because there's so many things happening that first week. You're still registering in class. Sometimes the books aren't in the bookstore. Those of you that order online may not have your books arrived yet. Sometimes professors don't require every single book on the recommended list, so you want to wait and see what's going to be required. So, those are all things that play a part in it. So, as we start preparing you for your lessons that you'll be doing, you think about this, right? Your first day of class, you're going to introduce the syllabus, allow for questions, maybe have an icebreaker or two, introduce yourselves, really start establishing a safe environment, right? Whether you introduce content or not, that really will be up to you. I rarely do that in my first day of class. I just think it's kind of an opportunity to get to know each other, for the instructors to get to know the students, and vice versa. It's just kind of that opportunity to be able to introduce yourself to the class, let the students know what to expect, and really keep it kind of light. There's probably a certain level of anxiety and excitement that first day, so you want to keep it kind of light and give a nice overview for students. But again, you've probably seen instructors and professors who've been a lot more structured and get right into lecture that first week. That will depend on your own style and probably requirements from the university. Most of the universities I've worked for 4 different universities, have all given us flexibility to be a little bit more lax that first day of class, just because they know there's so many moving parts those first few weeks. So I tend to keep our first day of class very light, even for the online classes, because I think it's important for people just to be able to, kind of catch their bearings and be able to make sure that they have their books and they're registered for class and have all that logistical thing taken care of. So one kind of the last thing I want to leave you guys with is some thoughts, right? Think about your own experience as a student. What do you see as the most useful things that a faculty member can do during the first class meeting, right? Do you think that it's important for them to do some of the things that I talked about? Is it important to get structured? And then also, what are some of your pet peeves, right? What things bother you about what professors do? Are there certain things that bother you about what they do? So give some thought to that, start thinking about it, and then it'll help in this week's processing as you prepare for your own stuff, okay? Have a wonderful week. We'll see you guys next week, and take care.